closure that they seek.
Bernard Jenkin.
Mr. Speaker, in view of the fact that Chancellor Merkel has now called formally on the Commission to produce treaty texts to amend the European treaties, will my right honourable friend agree with the following statements: that the accumulated burden of policies, competences and tasks and budgets in the European Union has become too great, locating ill-justified powers at EU level can undermine democratic accountability, and that the time has therefore come to identify those areas in which EU action is neither logical, justifiable or workable? Does he share my surprise that these are words uttered by the Deputy Prime Minister more than 10 years ago?
No, I've read the same pamphlet too, and it's very good and sound common sense. We don't know exactly when treaty change will be proposed, how great that treaty change will be, but I'm absolutely clear, and the coalition is clear, there will be opportunities to advance our national interests. That is what we should be focused on.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, at today's European summit, does the Prime Minister agree with me that we need not just for Greece and Italy to sort out their problems and the proper recapitalisation of Europe's banks, but also an agenda to help Europe and indeed Britain to grow?
What is absolutely necessary this evening is to deal with the key elements of the Eurozone crisis, which is acting as a drag anchor on recoveries in many other countries, including our own. The key elements of that are decisive action to deal with the Greek situation, a proper recapitalisation of the banks, which hasn't happened across Europe up to now, and the stress tests carried out haven't had credibility. But above all, the most important thing is the construction of this firewall, of this European fund, to prevent contagion taking place elsewhere. He's absolutely right that a wider growth strategy across Europe is required. That's what was debated on Sunday, and that is where the Commission proposals in terms of completing the Services Directive, completing the single market, liberalising energy policy, cutting regulation, all of those proposals could have been written right here in London.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, the point I would emphasise to him is that those are long-term measures, but we also need immediate action for growth, and that needs to happen not just at European meetings but at the G20 next week. Now, Mr. Speaker, we know his real focus hasn't been, unfortunately, on sorting out the Eurozone crisis. It's been sorting out the problems on his own side. Now, he said on Monday that his priority is to repatriate powers from Europe. Which powers and when?
One serious question, then straight on to the politics. How absolutely typical. Let me just make this point. When it comes to the meeting this evening about the future of Europe, can I just say to him, the idea you could go into that meeting arguing Britain should add an extra £100 billion to its deficit is a complete and utter joke. Right. In terms of our relationship with Europe, let me answer the question very directly. The coalition agreement does talk about rebalancing power between Britain and Europe. This coalition has already achieved bringing back one power, the bailout power that his government gave away.
Mr. Speaker, he said in this House on Monday, "I remain firmly committed to bringing back more powers from Brussels." But yesterday, the Deputy Prime Minister, when asked about his plan, said, and I quote, "It won't work, it will be condemned to failure." So one day, we have the Prime Minister saying yes to repatriation, and 24 hours later, the Deputy Prime Minister says no. Mr. Speaker, on this crucial question, who speaks for the government?
What the Deputy Prime Minister said yesterday, and let me quote, "There's a perfectly good case to rebalance the responsibilities between the European Union and its member states." Right. What a contrast with what the leader of the Labour Party said. He was asked this question. John Sopel, let me ask this single question, yes or no answer. Has Brussels got too much power? Miliband, I don't think it's got too much power. So what we have, Mr. Speaker, is very plain. There is a group of people on this side of the House who want some rebalancing, a group of people who want a lot of rebalancing, and a complete mug who wants no rebalancing at all.
Mr. Speaker, why doesn't he come clean about the split between himself and the Deputy Prime Minister? This is what the Deputy Prime Minister was asked. Is David Cameron wrong to promise at some point the idea of another treaty that might bring powers back? And he said this government, of which I'm a Deputy Prime Minister, is not going to launch some sort of dawn raid, some smash and grab raid on Brussels. It won't work. It will be condemned to failure. So, Mr. Speaker, which is it? Who speaks for the government? It's no wonder his backbenchers are saying there isn't clarity about the government's position, and the Secretary of the 1922 Committee said the government's position is politically unsustainable. Is it his position to get out of the social chapter? Is it his position to get out of the social chapter? Yes or no?
It is this coalition that's worked together to get us out of the bailout fund, to get us out of the Greek bailout, to deliver this year a freeze of the European budget. That's what this coalition has achieved. The split that we have is between the right honourable gentleman and reality. That is the split that we have. And we had the greatest proof of that. I talked to the House about this on Monday, but it's so good I've got to do it again. When he was asked if he wanted to join the euro, he said, "It depends how long I'm Prime Minister for." That's the split. The Labour Party and reality.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, he will be going to the Council in December to negotiate on behalf of Britain, and treaty change may be on the agenda. I asked him the question again. His education secretary said on the radio yesterday morning, "I think we should take back powers over employment law." But his Deputy Prime Minister disagrees. What's the Prime Minister's position?
I tell you what would be on the agenda if he was going to the meeting in Brussels tonight. We wouldn't be discussing Italy. We wouldn't be discussing Greece. It'd be Britain handing out the begging bowl, asking for a bailout. Now, we know the honourable gentleman now wants to join the euro. The other thing that they want to do is to leave the IMF. They had the opportunity in this Parliament to vote for an increase in IMF funds, which was agreed at the London Council by their own government. They rejected that. So we now have the extraordinary situation where they want to join the euro and leave the IMF. It's not France they want to be like, it's Monaco.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, it's no wonder he had a problem on Monday, because the truth is he led his backbenchers on, making a promise he knows he can't keep and is ruled out by the coalition agreement. We've got a Prime Minister who can't speak for his government. And on the day of the euro, Mr. Speaker, on the day of the Eurozone crisis, we have a Prime Minister who has spent the last week pleading with his backbenchers, not leading for Britain in Europe.
I might have had a problem on Monday. I think he's got a problem on Wednesday. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, if he went to that meeting tonight, his message to Berlusconi would be ignore the markets, just carry on spending. His message to the rest of Europe would be that Labour think, you spend another £100 billion adding to our deficit. After they'd finished laughing, there'd be no time for the rest of the meeting.
Sir Peter Tapsell. Order! Members should calm down and listen to Sir Peter Tapsell.
Pas de Zale was Talleyrand's advice to leaders of the opposition, which meant that he thought that they should not exist in a permanent state of hysteria.
As ever, nothing but wisdom from my right honourable friend.
Angela Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister tell us whether any more projects have been awarded investment by the Regional Growth Fund? Or does the tally still stand at just 2 businesses helped by his flagship policy?
I'm afraid to say she is completely wrong. There are around 40 projects that have received that have been greenlit for funding, and this is completely on schedule. 50 bids were successful in round 1, receiving conditional allocation of £450 million to deliver 27,000 new or safeguarded jobs, up to 100,000 jobs in supply chains. Instead of carping, she should be welcoming that.
Mark Halsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency of Rugby was recently pleased to welcome Mary Portas as part of her review into Britain's high streets. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Rugby's positive approach to new housing, which will create new customers for the high street, is an effective way of supporting town centres?
Yeah. Well, I'm delighted that Mary Portas has made it to Rugby, and I agree with what my honourable friend said. We do need to build more houses in our country. We do need to reform the planning system, but we want to do it in a way that gives more control to local people so we can actually make sure that we have thriving high streets in the future.
Sandra Osborne.
Mr. Speaker, the whole town of Cumnock in my constituency is in a state of shock following the murder last weekend, very brutal murder of a local man, Stuart Walker, a very popular local man. Will the Prime Minister join me in sending condolences to Stuart's family? And amidst much unhelpful speculation about the motivation for this murder, will he join me in calling on local people who have any information to go forward to the police to help them with their inquiries?
I certainly join the Honourable Lady in sending condolences to her constituents' family, and what she says is absolutely right. It was once said that the police are the public and the public are the police. The police cannot solve crimes without the help of the public, and I hope everyone will cooperate in the best way they can.
Mr. Gavin Barwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My 14-year-old constituent, Lillian Groves, was killed outside her home by a driver under the influence of drugs. He was sentenced to just 8 months in jail and was released after 4 months. Will the Prime Minister agree to meet with Lillian's family to hear their case for Lillian's Law, a package of measures to ensure that in future we take the menace of drug driving as seriously as we currently do drink driving?
Well, I think my honourable friend speaks for the whole House when he says we really have got to make sure we start treating drug driving as seriously as drink driving. This is an issue that's been raised repeatedly, but not enough has been done. One of the things that we are doing is actually making sure the police are able to test for drug driving and making that drug testing equipment available. As we test that and make sure that it works properly, I think we can look at strengthening things still further, and I'm very happy to do as he says.
John McDonnell.
It was reported over a week ago that Bank of England had reprimanded one commercial bank, and there may be others, who tried to manipulate the gilts market to exploit quantitative easing. Could the Prime Minister ask for a report on this matter? And if it is true, that we explain to the bankers that we will use the full force of law against them if they try to rip off the taxpayer.
And I think it's very important to send a message to all people in financial services that there isn't something called white-collar crime that is less serious than other crime. Crime is crime and should be investigated and prosecuted with the full force of the law.
Sir Duncan Hames.
Mr. Speaker, proposals before this House next week will see cuts to legal aid funding for advice services, which in the case of Wiltshire's CAB amount to £250,000 a year. I welcome the £20 million stopgap the government has found to replace this funding next year, but will the Prime Minister ensure that the government puts in place lasting funding arrangements to sustain these services on which so many people rely?
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point, and it's no good people shouting down. Every party in this House has accepted the need to reform legal aid. The figures are... Yes, you say no, you haven't. You have accepted it, because the figures are very clear. We spend £39 per head in this country on legal aid, compared with £18 per head in New Zealand with a similar legal system. In Spain and France, the spending is as low as £5 per head. As my honourable friend said, we are putting in the £20 million additional funding for not-for-profit organisations. We've also, I think, rightly praised the local councils that have gone on funding Citizens Advice Bureau. And I'll certainly look at what he says, because this is a very important organisation that does vital work for all our constituents.
Paul Blomfield.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Prime Minister will join with me in congratulating Sheffield University's Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, which celebrated its 10th anniversary yesterday and today with a series of events at Westminster organised in partnership with Boeing and Rolls-Royce. But will he also join with me and with the Business Select Committee in endorsing the aim of growing our manufacturing GDP from its current 12.5% to nearer the 20% enjoyed by most of our competitors? And will he commit the government to work with...
It's enough. got the drift. OK. Prime Minister.
Very much with what the honourable gentleman said. I'm pleased to know that the Deputy Prime Minister actually hosted Sheffield University at number 10 Downing Street to celebrate their success. I think we are seeing some positive signs of rebalancing in our economy. Recently, I was at the big investment BP are making in the North Sea, the opening of the new Airbus factory at Broughton in Wales. If you look across our auto industry, whether it is Nissan or Toyota or Jaguar Land